It is the Resistance Report for March 21st, 2017. Good evening. There's a lot to talk about tonight. There is always, every day in Trumpland, there is a great deal to talk about. Our goal is to put the various strands together. For example, today a Ukrainian lawmaker released financial documents showing that former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort laundered payments from the party of the former Ukrainian president, whom he worked for and who enjoyed Moscow's backing while he was in power and has been in hiding in Russia since being overthrown by pro-Western protesters in 2014. Now, Manafort, according to these documents, has been receiving or had been receiving this laundered money. Manafort, as you probably know, resigned from Trump's campaign or was dismissed in August after his name surfaced in connection with some of these payments. Now, August also, remember, is after the FBI began its investigation of possible collusion between Trump campaign aides and Russian operatives to throw the election of 2016 in favor of Trump. These documents today, in terms of Manafort laundering, were released just hours after the Intelligence Committee questioned FBI Director James Comey about coordination or possible coordination between the Trump campaign and Russian operatives. Now, I do not think we're going to get to the bottom of this until or unless we have a bipartisan select committee of Congress and an independent special prosecutor who is going to, without any inhibitions by Republican overseers, describe and tell Americans on the basis of an independent investigation what actually happened. He can utilize what the FBI has already got. He must do that. But he also can subpoena Trump tax records and anything else. That's the only way we are going to know. All of these dribs and drabs, such as today, these documents as to Paul Manafort laundered payments, these are just dribs and drabs. They do not tell us any kind of complete story. There is a huge amount of circumstantial evidence. It will never come together unless we have a bipartisan select committee and an independent special prosecutor. Now remember, even a close ally of Trump, Representative David Nunes, who is the House Intelligence Committee chairman, concluded yesterday that there was a gray cloud over the administration. A suspicion hung over the Trump White House having to do with this Russian connection. Now, as I said yesterday, and you have obviously been on the phones because we're getting some response to this, there should be no decision on Neil Gorsuch as Supreme Court Justice until this gray cloud of suspicion is lifted. In fact, today, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said that he wanted the Senate to delay a vote on Gorsuch as long as Trump's campaign remains under investigation by the FBI. Kudos to Chuck Schumer, and kudos to many of you who obviously have been planting that idea in his and other heads of members of Congress. Now, meanwhile, Ivanka Trump, and I want to get into this a bit, not to pick on Ivanka Trump, but to show a pattern here with regard to her father and the family and a complete and total disregard for conflicts of interest that takes us back years to Russia as well. Ivanka Trump, who has myriad business interests that overlap with her father's, is now moving into the West Wing as a top White House advisor. Now, she is getting security clearance. She is also getting communication devices that go with that security clearance, but she is not being sworn in. She will hold no official position. She is not a government employee, and therefore she is not legally bound to ethics laws and ethics rules in terms of conflicts of interest. Now, this is, to me, absurd. Doesn't the Trump administration have enough ethics problems without bringing on another ethics problem? It has enough ethics problems to sink a ship right now, and so why does it need Ivanka Trump to take this strange position? Why can't she simply do what her husband, Jared Kushner, has done, who is also in the White House, also a Trump advisor, but he at least took an oath of office. He at least is an employee. He is bound legally to ethics laws. Why can't Ivanka Trump do the same thing? She still owns her fashion and jewelry brand. She's also going to be publishing a book in May, out next May. But she says, and it sounds very much like her father, she says that she will distance herself from the day-to-day operations of the Ivanka Trump brand. Don't you love the way all of these people, these family members, are distancing themselves from the day-to-day operations, the businesses of the Trump brands, and she's going to convey her interests in a trust that will be controlled by her brother-in-law, Josh Kushner, and her sister-in-law, Nicole Meyer. If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. It's almost as if a coup has occurred, a kind of coup d'etat, and the dictator's family has now moved into the palace and are about to loot the country. Feels that way, doesn't it? The utter disdain that the Trumps have for ethics laws and ethics rules and ethics principles is simply jaw-dropping. At the same time, Trump and House Republicans are readying a vote. This will happen Thursday on the replacement, so-called, for Obamacare. Let's call it Trump Care. I think we do have to call it Trump Care. It is Trump Care. Now, since no House Democrats are going to vote for this absurd bill that ultimately is going to take away 24 million people's health insurance, health coverage, even next year it would take away 16 million people's health coverage. Since no Democrats are going to vote for this, the House Republican leadership and Donald Trump need to get 21 members. They cannot lose more than 21 members, I should say. Now, it looks as though they're not going to quite get 21 Republican members. In other words, this could be a loss for them. Some changes that they have unveiled, and I'm talking about the Republican leadership and the Trump White House, they unveiled yesterday a few changes coming to the surface today in order to get conservative Republican House members on board. These changes are not great in terms of the public and the public interest and people who depend on health insurance and Medicaid. The changes would, number one, move up the date for repealing the taxes that support Obamacare. That's good for the rich, who are going to get a $600 billion tax windfall out of all of this, but not good for the people who are relying on Obamacare to be there for them. And they're going to further limit Medicaid. Now, you have to understand, buried in this House bill is the seeds of the destruction of Medicaid. we've had on the books for low-income people in this country since 1965. This is not just getting rid of Obamacare. This is also starting the process that Paul Ryan has been trying to get going for years. And he finally can, now that he has Donald Trump in the White House, starting to abolish, get rid of Medicaid. And you know what's next. Getting rid of Medicaid, then it's Medicare and the Social Security. A study done and released today showed that Trump's budget plan and his Trump Care alternative to Obamacare will end up, if they are both implemented, and there's a big if, but if they are both implemented, Trump Care and also his budget, will end up transferring tens of billions of dollars from the residents of red states to the residents of blue states. Do you follow me? Do you see how stupid this is politically for the Republicans and for Trump? Why is that? It's because a higher percentage of the beneficiaries of Obamacare, Medicaid, and other programs for the poor and working class, a higher percentage of them live in red states than they do in blue states, while a higher percentage of the people who are wealthy and will get a gigantic tax cut out of all of this live in blue states. And so it is going to result, if all of this were to go through, in a gigantic transfer from red states to blue states. Trump voters will be shafted. Governors of red states will be hurt. So why is it that Trump and the Republicans are doing this? They're doing it out of ideology. I hope it's not cruelty. Let's say it's just out of ideology. They just don't like Obamacare. They don't want the federal government getting involved in anything like this. This country is in a crisis right now of governance. There is no adult in charge. Instead, we've got a president who acts like an unhinged, narcissistic child who tweets absurd lies over and over again, holds rallies to prop up his fragile ego, whose conflicts of interest are ubiquitous and they are legion, whose presidency is under a gray cloud of suspicion with regard to possible ties to Russian operatives that got, possibly, the election for him. He's advised by his daughter and son-in-law and an oddball who once ran a white supremacist fake news outlet. His cabinet, well, don't get me started. His cabinet is an assortment of billionaires, CEOs, veterans of Wall Street, ideologues, none of whom has any interest in enforcing the laws that their departments are supposed to enforce. How can they even take an oath of office to faithfully execute the laws when almost every one of them is on record opposing the very laws that their departments are supposed to execute? Meanwhile, Trump has downgraded or eviscerated the groups that are responsible in government for giving presidents professional advice on foreign policy, on foreign intelligence, on the economy. Doesn't even have a council of economic advisors. On science, he's getting rid of all the science advisors, cutting the budgets of research, domestic policy. Where does he get most of his news? He gets it from television. And meanwhile, Congress is in the hands of Republicans who for years have only said no. They don't even know how to initiate anything that has any kind of policy integrity to it, because for years and years all they have known and experienced and got actually pretty good at is saying no to a president. That's what they did for 8 years with Obama. They have no clue how to initiate policy. They have never, most of them, never passed a budget into law. More generally, they don't even like government. What are they doing there? They've not shared responsibility for governing the nation. They don't know how to govern the nation. So as a result of all of this, we have in the United States the most powerful nation in the world, the richest nation in the world, a nation that should be providing leadership to the rest of the world. We have a nation that is rudderless and leaderless, where we need thoughtful resolve. We have instead thoughtless name-calling. Where we need democratic deliberation, we have authoritarian rants and rallies. Now, the only way out of this crisis of governance is for all of us, you, me, everybody you know, to take charge. You are needed, and you are needed now. And I'm not just talking about the midterm elections, obviously. But we are going to have April, and April, another congressional recess is coming up. That means you and hopefully your indivisible group. Go to indivisibleguide.com. You and your indivisible group hopefully will have an opportunity, another opportunity, to confront members of Congress to tell them what you believe, why you don't want the Affordable Care Act repealed, for example, why you don't think that Neil Gorsuch, if he is not yet confirmed, should be confirmed, and so forth. You also, several of you, have an opportunity to take part in elections. Believe it or not, there are some elections to Congress happening very soon. April 11th in Kansas, Jim Thompson, a Democrat, is taking on Ron Estes, a Republican. Thompson wants to increase the minimum wage, remove barriers to economic mobility for working and middle class, protect veterans, and so forth. And what about Ron Estes, the Republican? He wants to typically roll back regulations, implement stronger safeguards against Islamic terrorism. You know the rest. Maybe you know somebody in this district in Kansas. Maybe you can even take part. Montana, on May 25th, there's also an election. I believe it's an at-large seat. Rob Quist, the Democrat, who is single-payer health care proponent, pro-choice. He opposes cuts in public education. Rob Quist is taking on Greg Gianforte, the Republican, who wants to reduce regulations on coal and timber, who is pro-gun, defends the right to hunt on public lands, wants to repeal and replace Obamacare, and so on. My point is that these elections, although the midterms are not coming up for another year, these elections, many of them, are coming up sooner than that. The primary elections are coming up fairly soon, and also you have an opportunity to participate in the selection of people who are going to run for primary elections, in the primaries. You might even want to run yourself. A couple of your questions, several of your questions. Ellen Van Vliet Schaefer. Did I pronounce it correctly? How is it possible, you ask, that 39% of Americans still approve of Trump in the Gallup poll? Well, Ellen, that is somewhat down from the percentage of Americans who voted for Donald Trump. But many Americans get their news from Fox News. Many Americans don't even get much news. Donald Trump appears to a lot of people to be a strongman. It's going to take a while for some of his voters to catch on that this is, and his election represents the largest bait and switch operation in history. They were conned. they will get it. Wendy Darling, you say, is it legal for Ivanka Trump to get a White House office and security clearance without being an employee? Wendy, it is not entirely legal. This is an area of the law that is not well settled. Jamie Garlick, who is her lawyer, was in the Justice Department in the Clinton administration, and says and has said publicly that we are in a kind of new territory here. I personally, my reading of the law is that it is not legal, that if you are getting a security clearance and you are also getting devices that are communication devices, you are in the White House, you are around a lot of classified material, you should be a government employee and you should be bound by the ethics laws, and therefore you should not have conflicts of interest. To me, it is pretty clear. She and her lawyer are saying it's not all that clear. You also ask Wendy if it's ethical. No, it is not ethical. Jerry Neild, will someone step in if it looks like our democracy is about to collapse, like the intelligence agencies or Congress or the military? Jerry, look, our democracy is not about to collapse. The thing you have to remember is that the framers of the Constitution, back in the 18th century, they had one major purpose in mind. They wanted a democracy, they wanted a republic, more accurately, but they wanted to avoid tyranny. That was their number one goal, avoid tyranny. They knew they needed to have a government, but they did not want power in one tyrant. And that's why they set up a system with separation of powers. And that's why the courts are fighting back against Trump. That's why many members of Congress, even Republicans, are also taking stands, and we need to encourage them. The framers set up a system that has checks and balances in it, so that even if Trump is out of hand, there is the possibility that other powers can check that power in the executive branch. And they set up a system of federalism. So you have a federal government, even if the federal government goes nuts, you still have state governments that can offer some constraint on the federal government. So, Jerry, I wouldn't worry about it. We also have a process of impeachment. And I believe that that is going to be utilized within 4 years. Lisa Lynborn, you ask, it seems that Trump and the Republicans are still short of the votes they'll need to get Trump care through the House on Thursday. What happens if they don't have the votes? Lisa, if they don't have the votes, there will not be a vote. In other words, they count the votes in advance. They don't want to have a failed vote. So the vote will be moved to Friday, or if they don't have the votes, it'll be moved to next week. And all the time, you're going to have Paul Ryan and Donald Trump coercing, threatening, bribing, however they can get enough votes. They just want enough votes. There's going to be a war room in the White House. I know how this is done. I've been there. And they will just keep postponing the vote until they get enough votes. Now, the Senate is a slightly different issue. It's got to get through the House. The big danger for Trump and the Republicans is they get it through the House and they can't persuade the Senate. Then they lose. And the problem for Trump especially is that if he loses on this, his first as powerful as he wants people to think, or as he wants to think. For losing for Donald Trump is a traumatic and event. So that's where I understand former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort has hired a crisis communications firm Does this mean Manafort is under investigation by the FBI? John, we don't know that he's under investigation by the FBI. That crisis communication firm may be because of the money laundering allegations that came out today, but usually people don't hire a crisis communication firm in Washington unless they are worried that something big is going to come out and they need to handle the media in such a way that they are not pillaged. You see, the way this game works is people are hung out to dry. You understand that? The closer the investigation of Russian interfering in the 2016 election gets to Donald Trump, the more Donald Trump is going to be insulated by his aides, and people like Manafort are going to be let out to dry. They are going to be scapegoated. And that's why I think Manafort is hiring a communications crisis firm. And finally, Jim Peterson, Wall Street had a bad day today. Does this have anything to do with Trump's bad few days? Jim, it has a lot to do. Specifically, the reason Wall Street has done so well, and the stock market has done so well, is the expectation that Donald Trump is going to be able to deliver a major corporate tax cut and also major regulatory rollbacks, both of which are going to boost the profits of American corporations and therefore boost stock prices. But when Trump has a bad few days or a bad week or a bad month, such as he has had, and it looks like he may start losing big, that is going to erode confidence that he's going to be able to get any of this done, such as a big Wall Street, big tax cut for big corporations. And that in turn is going to mean that stock prices are not going to go up in the future. And as you know, every daily stock price is a reading about future expectations of what's going to happen to that stock. Do you understand? So if the expectation is that the stock is not going to go up, then today's stock price is going to go down. And that is what has happened. Stock market is, at this point in time, a pretty good reading on the market's confidence in Donald Trump's ability to follow through on promises that affect corporate profits. Keep in mind, again, Thursday is a big day with regard to the Trump Care vote, but every day is a big day with regard to what happens to this Trump White House and Republican enablers in Congress. You are fighting back, and you are fighting back incredibly well. If you can't get through to your member of Congress, keep on calling. They are registering. I got very recently, yesterday, day before, I got an email from a former Republican congressperson from Kansas who said that even in Kansas, Republicans are starting to feel your activism. And if Republicans in Kansas are feeling your activism, believe me, Republicans in Washington, all over the country, are feeling your activism, and Donald Trump and the White House is feeling your activism. So don't let up. If anything, increase the pressure. We cannot allow this administration to continue on as it has been going. It is illegitimate, and on top of being illegitimate, Donald Trump does have to be impeached, not because he's a Republican, but because he is inimical to democracy. That ends tonight's Resistance Report. I'll see you tomorrow.